right, we're back with No Apologies on BEK. And ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to have our next guest with us. Representative Jeremy Munson, a state representative in Minnesota, I believe from Mankato. I'm not sure how this guy has so much energy. It sounds to me, at least, when I follow him, that he is doing so much. Jeremy, welcome. Welcome. I'm glad you're on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show. I love your show. It's great.
Oh, great.
Good.
Wow, that is a kind thing to say.
Fantastic. So Jeremy, you and I spoke very briefly about a couple of things that we could discuss, and there are so many. But I'm gonna jump right in. Well, first off, I'm gonna say that you and I met at an organizational convention or meeting, whatever, of Liberty legislators, and there are so few of us. It seems, at least, that it's great when we're able to connect. That's how you and I met, and I was fascinated by what you were accomplishing in the very blue state, seemingly, of Minnesota. And so that's kind of the foundation of where we're at. But I do want to jump right into the very first thing that you and I discussed could be topical, and that is secession. That we're looking at, you have a petition for secession of a number of counties from the state of Minnesota to the state of South Dakota. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually a lot of people in my area have been picking up and moving to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or moving to Iowa, a tax-friendlier state with less regulations, more freedom. And farmers can't do that because they can't take their land with them. So they've been asking me, what would it take for us to actually move the border of South Dakota or Iowa so that our county could move there? And I had House research how this would be done, and they came back to me with the actual legislation. So I introduced it as a bill in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and it caused quite a stir on social media just by introducing the bill.
Shocker.
I bet. I saw you were on Newsmax not too long ago, and they carried it as well. So clearly, it's making some waves. So, in a nutshell, what would be involved? I would assume that the Congress. My understanding is if this were to happen, Congress would have to be involved. U.S. Congress and South Dakota would have to be involved. What does it take?
Yeah, so it would take the counties to vote to go to a neighboring state. So that would, hopefully the county would be adjoining that state. Once that county joined, then the next state away could vote to join as well. And then once that's done, the legislature of Minnesota and that state would have to agree. And then Congress would have to agree to change the borders, which they do actually fairly frequently for rivers and such that move some land. But as you know, in Oregon, 7 counties now have voted to join rural Idaho. So 7 rural Oregon counties have voted to join Idaho. And if that would be approved by the legislatures and go to Congress, it would create a West Coast Idaho.
That cracks me up too. I know we've done that. We've actually talked about this on this program too. Maybe you saw it, but I've also been watching kind of the Northern California thing too, because there's rumblings there. There's been rumblings in Texas. A lot of different states are actually looking at this. They're like disgruntled. They're like, we're red. We don't belong with this blue leadership. We just want to bail.
Yeah, and it is I study with Liberty. The best thing to give people is their own choice, and to make more people happy, bring politics to be more at the local level, and let people associate with other states that they, without having to move, right? Keep everybody in your community and just choose better governance.
My question is how is the feeling in South Dakota? They're like, come on over. What's the feeling that you're getting from the South Dakota folks? Yeah,
well, actually, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem retweeted the proposal and welcomed us to South Dakota if we choose. Earlier this week, I met with Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds and talked about this proposal. She thought it was a great idea because, again, they're a red state and they have the same values that we have here in rural Minnesota.
Sure. Now, rural Minnesota, if you are not aware, is outstate Minnesota is not the same as the blue metro areas of Minnesota. You've got your really concentrated blue areas in Minneapolis and some in Duluth, but then the rest of the outstate of the other districts are very, very red.
Yes. And it's taxes, regulations, everything. The defund the police movement that became so popular in Minneapolis is just non-existent here in rural Minnesota. We love our police. So there's so many things that are this great divide. And Governor Walz, our governor of Minnesota, he ran on a campaign of one Minnesota, but he's really divided us, especially over the past year with the COVID lockdown orders, the mask mandates, and everything else. And so it's caused greater division in our state. And I would just love to see rural Minnesota choose better governance and be governed by South Dakota or Iowa.
Yeah, and Kristi Noem in her tweet said, in South Dakota, we roll out the red carpet for people who love personal responsibility and freedom. So yeah, that's fantastic. I'll say, Jeremy, I was a little bit saddened to see this map where a good portion of Minnesota moves to South Dakota and none of it's moving to North Dakota. But I will say I understand, because South Dakota, as far as liberty goes, is doing so much more with so much less than what North Dakota has as far as resources and so forth. So I get it. Sadly, I get it. Do you think, what's the likelihood of their going to the next step?
Well, I think it's starting the conversation. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and ask how they can get involved, if they can put up billboards, in support of this and such. And it doesn't prevent counties from moving to North Dakota. I've talked to a lot of people in East Grand Forks that would love to join North Dakota. My family from Breckenridge moved to Wahpeton to escape Minnesota. So I think there's a lot of people on the border counties that would love to go to North Dakota. So it's not specific to a certain state, but I hope it can move forward. I'd like to get a senator to introduce it in the Minnesota Senate. As you know, Minnesota is the only divided legislature in the entire country where we have a Republican-controlled Senate and a Democrat-controlled House. And so if we could have a senator introduce it in the Minnesota Senate and hold hearings on it, we could have farmers from border communities, business owners that have moved to neighboring states, and mayors and such that have lost so many community members and businesses to neighboring states to come and talk about this disparity, because we are competing against neighboring states all the time. And we need to keep people here in Minnesota for our economy. So I think it would be good to have hearings. And, it's a possibility that Democrats just might get sick of us and just let us go.
Sorry,
I like that. I like that
okay,
strategy.
good riddance. Bye. That's so funny, and probably not false. Now, this is a kind of a long process too. I mean, it takes a long time to get to, all of the hoops that you have to do that, like several years, I would assume.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people about, hey, why can't Western or Eastern North Dakota or Eastern Dakota? And we don't want, that would be 2 additional senators coming in, right? We don't want to have new senators. We can just join another state. There's no reason why the Democrats in DC shouldn't let us go. They should just allow the border change.
I would think if you had a vote, certainly in the city of Minneapolis, they'd be happy to let you go. But I do agree with you that it would probably help gain a lot of traction if formal hearings could be held in the state Senate. So that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I want to, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say, overall, I think it's so important to talk about the disparity. Talk about the tax differences, talk about what it means for schools and everything else. And so that's win, lose or draw. I think there would be a win out of bringing this forward. Exactly.
Agreed. I'd like to pivot a little bit. We don't have much time in the segment, but we'll continue on in the next segment. I'd like to pivot to COVID. And, I've taken a look at a lot of your social media, and I think that we and you are on the same page with regard to that. Before we break, the one thing I wanted to point out, we recently had a segment about these drawings, the $1 million lotto for vaccinations. And I liked, you had Stranger Danger with Governor Walz in the back of a van offering free goodies, free park passes, fishing licenses, and more. So one of the things I do like is your creativity. Do you have any comments with regard to that incentivizing that they're doing?
Well, I think I've been able to attack social media pretty well with, trying to draw people in and engaging people in social media, which is, I think, one thing that you and I both do well is bringing the legislature to the people and transparency in government. And that means engaging with people on social media. And I think we have to really show people in a single image as they're scrolling through the newsfeed what the governor's doing. And this is what I see him doing. He's out there trying to entice our children to get vaccinated. By giving them a day pass to the Nickelodeon universe at the Mall of America. I mean, what kid wouldn't want that? And so we need to really rein it in. I think Stranger Danger was a good good image.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, and I think the whole concept is just plain gross. So, Jeremy, let's have you back on next segment. We'll be back, folks, in just a couple of minutes. We're going to talk more about COVID and some of our concerns. Be right back. All right, we are back. It's No Apologies on BEK, your after-hours oasis of sanity. I'm your host, Rick Becker, co-host Lori Hinz, and more importantly, our esteemed guest, Representative Jeremy Munson from Minnesota. Jeremy, welcome back once again. So, Jeremy, we closed out the last segment just kind of jumping in a little bit to COVID. And I know that you are, as an advocate of freedom, very much concerned with what has been happening regarding the COVID response. We always have to try and emphasize COVID response, not COVID. COVID itself had very little impact. Not to diminish the importance for those that lost loved ones. I guess that always needs to be said.
But the reaction to it,
for society as a whole, it had very little impact. The response to it, the government response to it, is what has been devastating for society. Let's talk just a little bit more about some of those concerns and your viewpoint, especially I've been hammering on our governor in North Dakota because I think, frankly, he did a crappy job. However, relative to your governor, he's a gem. So tell us a little bit about what it is like in Minnesota under the draconian dictatorship of Governor Walz.
Yeah, well, to bring us back to last March, I was actually with the governor at his residence just a few days before he declared his emergency. And we were talking about it, and he was imagining, the National Guard rolling down the streets, enforcing stay-at-home orders. It was really going to be draconian, and he locked everything down, locked down the restaurants, locked down churches, issued stay-at-home orders. You couldn't even go outside and go fishing, or it was terrible. But the devastation he did to our economy was horrendous. Even when it wasn't prevalent in rural Minnesota, he wanted to make sure that it was statewide. So there was a few cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, Mankato, Rochester that issued mask ordinances. And then those mayors were petitioning the governor to issue a statewide mask mandate because everybody in the town was going to neighboring communities to do their business. They were choosing not to come to that town. And so they wanted a statewide mandate. But when he issued the statewide mandate, you have to keep in mind, over half of our restaurants in Minnesota are within a half hour of another state. And so when they shut down Minnesota, residents were just going to Wisconsin or going to Iowa or South Dakota in free states to do their business. So it really hurt our economy. I filed a lawsuit against the governor just weeks after he issued his unconstitutional edicts and challenging the constitutionality of it because he was writing pure law, and they were going and enforcing it and threatening to jail people and fining people because of his own law that he wrote. He doesn't have that authority. There's a separation of powers for a reason. We also brought forward a motion in the legislature to end his emergency, but we have a chapter of law that gave him this authority, and it was really for fires and floods. It was never for a public health crisis. And so, like many other states, we tried to overrule him. And then the bottom line is, when he issues the emergency, the legislature in our law can, if both the House and Senate vote to end the emergency, then his powers end. But because we have a Democrat-controlled House, they refuse to end his emergency. And so we have this kind of reverse lawmaking path, or legislative veto, which the U.S. Supreme Court in the 80s found to be unconstitutional. We've also challenged that in court, and it's still waiting in both federal and state court.
Interesting. Any timeline for when that might occur? And along with that question, are you concerned that the court will render it moot now that the emergency power has been lifted?
Well,
or has it been, actually? I don't know.
Yeah, we of course we lost in county court because we challenged it in Ramsey County, which is the St. Paul. It went through appellate court and we lost there. So we're waiting for the Minnesota Supreme Court to take it up. The federal side, we challenged during elections because Minnesota has a law in the books that says it's illegal to wear a mask in public. You can't hide your face in public unless unless you're receiving medical treatment, and this was a prophylactic, so you're doing it not for treatment but preventative. And so he had written a law requiring a mask, and we challenged it to say the court has to decide. We have two laws in conflict with each other. They have to decide it because if you want to go vote, you would be breaking the law either way.
Sure.
And we brought that in front of a federal court, and they basically said, it's unprecedented time, and they didn't want to decide on it. So we've tried a lot of different legal challenges, but we do have a liberal Supreme Court. We have fairly conservative federal justices. So we have some cases that went through federal court. We won one where Governor Walz had restrictions on our churches. And so we did win that one. But it's ongoing, and I hope to solve this. The bottom line I see is there's a major taking that nobody's talking about, and that's the eviction moratorium. As a property owner, yes. I've had people that haven't paid for rent for many months. That's a pure taking. The governor has came in and said, you don't have to pay rent, and property owner, you still have to pay your mortgage. And it's a pure taking. And so we need to resolve that. And there's a lot of people that have lost their homes, a second home they had that they rented out. So we need to solve that and end the eviction moratorium. And what better time when the government was sending thousands and thousands of dollars in stimulus checks to people. We should have ripped the Band-Aid off at that time.
Yeah, no doubt about that. One of my sons is an attorney in Colorado Springs and does a lot of work with regard to labor, or I'm sorry, not labor, but the landlord type of law. And you're absolutely right. Taking is a perfect word for that. I don't know how.
Well, picking winners and losers is never a good thing. When somebody is at somebody else's expenses getting really shafted.
Right, and I'm not quite sure how they see the benefit. It's more of a platitude or a pandering type of legislation or executive order. It's ridiculous. Governor Paulus in Colorado has been having an extension after extension after extension of the eviction moratorium. So, yeah, hopefully you'll make some headway there because that's pretty significant. I saw you post on social media. I just want to hit this. Your daughter plays in a band, right?
Yes.
And I forget what instrument. Maybe a woodwind instrument, maybe a saxophone. I forget. But there's a hole in her mask, and it seems to me that a picture like that almost has to be a parody, but it was the real thing, right?
It was here in Bismarck too. We've had band members.
I mean, that was real. She plays saxophone, and all the holes on the saxophone aren't covered up, so the air is still escaping that way. And I'm a hobby sports photographer, so I take pictures of my kids playing basketball wearing masks. And my friend in North Dakota thought it was parody too, because she can't believe people were wearing masks while running in playing sports.
Well, Jeremy, let me tell you, see, the problem that you have, sir, is you don't understand science, okay? Because science. So with that, let's take a break. We're going to come back for a third segment with you, Jeremy, and I appreciate you coming back on. And we're going to discuss the ramifications of being a legislator in a blue state versus a red state. Stick with us, folks. All right, we are back for our final segment with Representative Jeremy Munson. Thank you for joining us again. Jeremy, welcome back in. And so we're going to talk about I think probably our final topic here, and that is going to be juxtaposing what it's like for you versus what it's like for someone like me, being a legislator in a blue state versus a red state. And I mean, wow, I have so many thoughts on this. But you have the Senate, Republicans have the Senate, but you're in the House in the minority. Do you feel like you're able to accomplish much?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. My vote in the House doesn't matter. They can pass whatever they want without using any minority votes. But there are certain things that you can get through if you believe in liberty and you want to protect individual rights if it's a blue state. And you could work on getting rid of corporate cronyism, right? That's one thing that I will agree with Democrats on, is that so the legislation is picking winners and losers. And when Republicans are in charge, they choose to do big handouts to big pharma and all these, big corporations. And so I call that out a lot. We have a program in Minnesota called reinsurance, which is a big bailout because Obamacare destroyed our markets, that we actually, subsidize private health insurance companies to lower their rates. And so I fight against reinsurance, which Republicans in Minnesota typically like. And then all of these, picking winners and losers during the pandemic, when all this money rained down from the federal government, all the lobbyists just started feeding at the trough of government and calling that out and pushing back. And of course, Democrats typically hate big pharma, except for vaccines. For vaccines, they actually kind of like it, right? They hate Pfizer.
Well, there's all that virtue signaling stuff that they can go on with that,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer were the enemy of the state with the opioid crisis. They caused this, and then all of a sudden, Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson can't touch them. They have,
Yeah, right. I'm curious if you could tell us the makeup of the House. What is the ratio in the House in Minnesota?
So we were really close. We had a big gain in the last election, and we're now just 6 seats short.
Oh, wow.
And in the Senate, we had a 1-seat majority, and then 2 Democrats from the Iron Range left the Democrat Party and became independents. So we have 3 caucuses in the Senate, and of course we have 3 caucuses in the Minnesota House. I started a new caucus with 3 other members called the New House Republican Caucus, much like your caucus in North Dakota. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
I like your name. It's a lot safer, and it's not as vilified. Probably it's harder for people to remember.
Yeah. Smart move, Jeremy.
Smart move
New Republicans. Yeah. So. Tell me just a little bit more about that, because I'm intrigued, obviously, having started a similar caucus in North Dakota. How is that going? How many members do you have? How are the 2 caucuses, the regular Republicans and the New Republicans, working together? Yeah,
well, we started our caucus primarily because of a difference in opinion on leadership. We didn't like the then Speaker of the House, Kurt Dowd, and how he was running things and how he would bend over for lobbyists and special interest groups. Since we've left, he's now the minority leader, but he actually took a job working for a DC lobbying firm, Stateside and Associates. So he's actually gone deeper into the swamp since we left. And a lot of the members of the old House caucus kind of say, well, you guys used to stand up and make these great arguments for liberty and why we should be voting against this stuff. And Kurt, the leader of that caucus, won't really allow us to caucus with, in the room with them. So there's quite a division, but we are so transparent in what we do. A lot of the other members see our arguments right on social media. We live stream the floor sessions to Facebook. We do live caucuses where we actually go through omnibus bills and lay out all the arguments why conservatives should vote against these. And I think that's been really resonating with people in that caucus.
They love transparency.
See, that's the thing.
That's the whole thing.
And that's the way it is, I think, Jeremy, with all truly principled conservatives, regardless of whether they're Republican or not, is that they focus on transparency because they have nothing to hide. They believe in principle. The principle's out there. And boring or not, you can almost always know what a true conservative's vote is going to be because they're consistent. And so in that, there's nothing to hide. Yeah.
And that's why a lot of the lobbyists have told me is that I don't even come and talk to you anymore because I know how you're going to vote. Right?
There you go. Well, that's a great thing. I mean, that's why you elect people, because you know how they're going to vote. Isn't that the whole premise?
Right, exactly. So do you foresee a change in the majority in this next election cycle for the House in Minnesota?
I certainly do. I mean, I thought there was going to be a big sweep in the last election because of just going to all these events in rural Minnesota. And, Keith Ellison, what is our attorney general? He was a former congressman. And we had, I served with Ilhan Omar in the Minnesota House, also a big radical. So I thought that people had enough of Minneapolis. The problem is that Minnesota has very lax voter integrity, voter regulation laws. And so we need to restore some of that. We don't have provisional ballots. We don't require an ID. You can just have somebody come in and vouch for you to vote. And I've had so many people that I work with from India that voted in the 2016 election because all they needed was a cable bill or somebody to vouch for them. So that's the problem. We need to restore our elections. And if we can do that, we can take back the Minnesota House and the governor's race. And of course, we have a doctor running, Dr. Scott Jensen, who's been great. Yes. And he was right on COVID the whole time. So he has a great chance. People love doctors and trust doctors.
Yeah, we've seen him. I've seen some videos of Scott Jensen. He's excellent. He is just a really good communicator.
Are you formally endorsing Dr. Jensen, or are you holding the cards yet?
No, I'm all in on Scott Jensen. I have been since I served with him when he was in the Minnesota Senate, and we carried some healthcare regulation stuff together, or actually free markets and healthcare price transparency stuff together. I support him, and I hope he wins.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that's I do too. That would be phenomenal. There's got to be a strong get out the vote movement for all of rural Minnesota, and frankly, even urban Minnesota, for those that are fed up with the whole Black Lives Matter situation, what's happening to their community. I would think that if that's strong enough, it could work to Scott Jensen's advantage. Well, Jeremy, I really appreciate you having you on and your willingness to talk about these various topics. And I know you're involved in so much, so I would love to have you on again in the not too distant future to talk about some more things.
Yeah, I'd love to, and I love North Dakota.
All right. Thanks a lot.